3 gentle knocks. Mornings in Nice began with a veil so sheer it thinned the light of the Mediterranean like milk. Along the Promenade des Anglais, the shadows of palm trees brushed softly against fallen leaves. The sea whispered as it reached the shore, and the city woke in its own rhythm. Ethan Ward was still learning to move in time with it again. His sight had returned. His company once more belonged to him, and his name appeared in the headlines as the portrait of control and power. Yet, in the earliest hours, when the city lingered between sleep and awakening, he still searched for the serenity of his old darkness, recalling the peace he once found in the way his fingers measured the edge of a table or the height of a doorway. In his mind, a refuge remained, one built in shadow, waiting as though it had never been abandoned. 5 years earlier, the distraction of a driver and the misfortune of a wet curve had conspired against him, turning Ethan's world into a single, irreversible ghost. The sterile scent of hospital corridors had taught him to count the days. As he lost the difference between closing and opening his eyelids, he began to hear the silver ticking of clocks through his ears. In those years, inside a room in his family's villa on the slopes of Montboron, he had lived by listening to the sea he could not see. And within that dark emptiness, he had found an unlikely equilibrium through the presence of an unknown girl. She had never spoken her full name, nor shown her face. Yet every time she opened the window, the faint scent of citrus and lavender drifted in, a compass for his days without sight. The girl would tap the teacup gently 3 times on the tray before leaving it on the table. When she placed the cup in his hands, a paper-thin warmth would spread through his palms. Between the scent of her hair and the steadiness of her touch, there existed an order that made him feel safe. Ethan learned her sounds, her steps, her pauses between breaths as one learns the map of a city. Slowly, reverently, by heart. The day he regained his sight, the curtains were drawn open. The doctors' faces dissolved into light. Shadows found their meanings again. Ethan's eyes, like a record long kept on pause, resumed their song, allowing him not to hear the world again, but to see it. And that very day, the nameless girl was gone. It was as if she had never crossed the threshold, as if the scent of lavender and citrus had been a trick of his memory. No one said her name. The family advisor, the lawyer, the hospital staff, they all offered procedural words, ethical boundaries, anonymous agreements, and careful omissions. What remained to Ethan were only 3 things: a dried mimosa branch pressed between the pages of a braille book, a short piano melody he played in his headphones at night, and the faint rhythm of 3 gentle taps on a cup. As time passed, Ethan's vision cleared. The city unfolded before him in color, and the empty chair at his company began to call him back. Ward Holdings, once built on the prestige of his name, had become a fragile shell. The board was fractured, the markets distrustful, faith dissolved. After a long rehabilitation, Ethan returned to his office. The wide glass panels that filtered Nice's sunlight reminded him of new and old ways of looking out from within. The return of sight had given him a second life, and ambition, ever waiting, began to spell itself again in the modern lexicon of control. They assigned him a new assistant, Claire Bennett, whose work rhythm was as clear and precise as cold water. Her punctuality and quiet efficiency formed an invisible circle around him. Meeting notes were immaculate, schedules seamless, her command of the city's chaos almost chess-like. Ethan regarded Claire's understated grace as one might admire a clock that never made a sound, most perfect when unnoticed. But sometimes, at unexpected moments, the angle at which she held a pen that nearly slipped from her fingers, or the way she adjusted a glass so that no echo would ripple across the desk, stirred something familiar in him. A small, inexplicable tremor from the years of darkness. A rhythm he had once known. The clues first appeared as harmless details, then began to rise to the surface, refusing to sink. One evening, long after everyone had left the office, Ethan found an old ticket tucked between some forgotten files. Its yellowed edges carried the embossed mark of the Saint-Jean-d'Angely tram stop. Running his finger along the raised pattern, he felt the same calm he once knew from reading Braille. Patient, deliberate, intimate. The next morning, as Claire brought in a tray of coffee, she set the cup down and almost imperceptibly tapped the saucer 3 times. Perhaps a tremor, perhaps a habit. But those 3 faint ticks struck him like an echo, reminding him of the same signal, once used by unseen hands in a quiet room long ago. Ethan began walking the perimeter of his old lies, tracing the hidden architecture of a life buried within his office routines. In an archived care protocol, he found the record of a volunteer listed only by initials, CB. On the margin of that page, in a handwriting too soft to belong to bureaucracy, was a tiny crown mark. Ethan knew that mark. In the villa at Montboron, on the desk he once navigated by touch, one of the notebooks in the drawer had the same crown sketched on its corner. The nameless girl had drawn them as she read aloud, small crowns he could only discover when his fingertips snagged lightly on the paper's edge. The memory returned as vividly as a photograph newly developed. CB, the crown marks, the 3 taps, the scent of citrus and lavender. Everything aligned. The streets of Nice seemed to unfold in deliberate patterns, laying out clues like a map designed just for him. At the Cours Salea market, while walking through bundles of fresh mimosa, Ethan watched Claire purchase a small bouquet. She slipped it discreetly into her bag, a gesture so natural it almost vanished, as if it belonged to another life. Yet in that motion, Ethan saw the dry branch preserved between Braille pages years before. He began to hear the secret sentences behind her movements. The way she opened windows to balance the air, the precision with which she adjusted a pillow, the measured pause before stepping across a threshold. All of it was the same choreography once performed by invisible hands in his room. Claire approached doorframes with the same quiet caution. Seeing it was both disarming and undeniable. As Ward Holdings slowly steadied under his leadership, its new strategy took form: to merge harbor logistics with carbon-neutral supply lines, to render the Mediterranean's trade routes transparent, to offer investors a future framed by vision and sustainability. Ethan was chasing a prestigious deal, one that would turn the port of Nice into a hub for clean fuel. The board, immersed in figures and projections, could not see the man behind them, the one who carried the patience of 5 blind years. They wanted results, not reflection. Each evening, Ethan returned to his apartment overlooking the sea, where the only light came from the dim blue glow of his monitor. On its screen, a single blinking cursor pulsed, a dot of insistence. And every night, the same question returned, quiet and unyielding. Who was the girl who cared for him in the dark? And why had she vanished? The answer waited in a notebook Claire had left on her desk, an uncharacteristic break in her ordered world. Between its pages, in the corner of one sheet, the same small crown appeared again, drawn by hand. But it was not the symbol alone that silenced him. It was the word written above it, simple and unmistakable: Montboron. Those 2 words were enough to quiet the rest of the world. In that moment, Ethan understood. The presence that had once filled his blindness with lavender and citrus, the hands that brought silence with 3 gentle taps of porcelain, the person whose face he had never seen, had been standing beside him all along. Claire was her. Clarity, Ethan realized, could arrive as simply as the color of dawn spilling across the shoreline, or as unexpectedly as the light from a lighthouse cutting through a dense night. For him, clarity was the slow untying of a knot within his chest, an admission of what he had known all along. Their bond unfolded quietly, like an invisible line finally drawn onto a map. Claire's presence softened the sharp edges of his working life. Their shared hours became a bridge between the city's bright haste and its lingering twilights. Nice was not merely a backdrop, it was the living rhythm of their connection. In the mornings, they climbed the steps of Colline du Château to watch mist rise over the sea. At noon, they shared warm sake from a paper plate in the market at Cours-Salea, a silent agreement in every shared bite. Ethan learned to temper the speed that came with sight by embracing Claire's deliberate calm. Even when he looked at the edge of a table with his eyes instead of his hands, he practiced the same gentleness she had once taught him in darkness. Love between them confessed itself without words, through patterns, through order. When Ethan tidied his office after late meetings, he never forgot the 3 soft taps before setting down his cup. Claire no longer drew little crowns in the corners of her notebooks, but Ethan knew that even an unmarked page could carry the presence of her signature. One evening, as waves struck the stones below in long, measured intervals, the rhythm of Claire's breathing rested against his shoulder. The city enclosed them like a box built to keep quiet things safe. But the past never comes alone. Sometimes, it returns disguised as the faint smell of gasoline mixed with rain on George Fifth Avenue, knocking on the door of the present without warning. The contract Ward Holdings was pursuing drew more than ambition. It drew enemies. A rival company, restless and ruthless, began its own shadow work. Leaked documents appeared in the press, twisting truth into rumor, reshaping Ethan's years of blindness into a symbol of weakness. And while the noise of speculation filled the business pages, the true storm approached from elsewhere. Late one night, near the harbor, a truck's brakes failed. The accident split the gentle rhythm of the city's night in half. At first, it seemed a simple misfortune, but hours later, a power outage struck near the company's data line, then a flicker in offshore accounts, and soon another malfunction. A company car stalling at the same crossroads. Coincidence began to look like choreography. Ethan felt as if he stood again at the edge of darkness, where sight was less an advantage than a fragile burden. His fear was not for himself. The patience he had learned in blindness had taught him to bear pain without panic. His fear was for Claire. He knew her route home by heart. A line drawn into his phone, a fragile thread traced across the map of Nice. A path that, if walked carefully enough, would lead her home safely. But that evening, the sky was heavy, the kind that warned of sudden, merciless storms the city knew too well. Before leaving the office, Ethan wrote Claire a short note, asking her to rest, promising to plan the next morning together. He left the note on her desk, then hesitated. The room felt unnaturally still, as though silence itself had weight. By midnight, rain was drumming on the bus shelters like metal percussion. Ethan's phone vibrated, alerts, urgent and cold. Reports came from a narrow street parallel to the Promenade des Anglais. A car with dimmed headlights had skidded across the wet pavement. Ethan's mind fractured between discipline and dread. Each thought built and broke around the question: was she on that road? For once, the man who had rebuilt empires acted like any man chasing what he could not bear to lose. He stepped into the rain without an umbrella, as if the downpour could wash away everything except instinct. There were no sirens at the crash site yet, only shattered glass, water reflecting fractured neon, and the light of a car's headlamp turned the wrong way. No crowd, no witnesses. Nice at night was polite even in chaos. Curiosity peeked only from half-open windows. On the sidewalk, Ethan saw the outline of a woman standing with her arms crossed, trying to keep dry. The light trembled on the wet strands of her hair, the lines of her face melting into rain. Around her neck, something glinted. A small pendant shaped like the crown he had once felt drawn in the margins of a page. The metal quivered, curling inward with each falling drop. The world dimmed again, but this darkness did not fall over his eyes. It fell deep within him, a collapse not of sight, but of soul. The accident was ordinary and cruel. The slick pavement had made the curve look shallower. The brakes gave way like ghosts withdrawing their help. The car hovered a heartbeat too long in the air, then found its victim at the edge of the curb. Two lives brushed against fate, and one began to fall. Ethan ran forward, kneeling beside the shadow on the ground. He knew that rhythm instantly, the faint pulse that had once aligned with his own. Claire's breath came unevenly, like a song breaking apart. In her eyes, between rain and fading light, there still lingered the patience of someone who had spent her life giving calm to others. In that last instant, from somewhere deep inside memory, Ethan heard it again. 3 gentle knocks, the echo of a cup meeting its saucer, signaling that all was right, all complete. The sirens came eventually. Nice's elegant night was rewritten in red and white light. The hospital welcomed him again with its sharp white smell. But this time, another rhythm was faltering inside the room. Doctors spoke briefly, cleanly. The steady compressions on her chest and the injections racing through her veins led nowhere new. Claire had been too silent for too long. A small defect in her heart, dormant since birth, had been awakened by shock. Sudden, merciless, irreversible. The body, capable of hiding its flaws for years, sometimes revealed them only in the most untimely moments. Ethan had never wished to learn that truth so closely. By morning, the light over Nice thinned like a lament. The blue turned pale. The yellow came in hesitant pulses. From the hospital window, Ethan could see the sea, but the sea was no longer just a surface. It was a mirror. In it, he saw not the man he had been before the accident, but someone who carried both the patience of blindness and the sharpness of loss. In Claire's room, beside her bed, lay her bag. Inside it, a small notebook. The pages were filled with drafts, lists, ordinary days. On the last page, undated, a half-written mark, a sentence that never began. And in the corner, drawn lightly in pencil, a small crown. It seemed to shelter something invisible, modestly and completely. The funeral was simple, brief. A small chapel in the center of Nice, a handful of people, a drizzle that softened everything. Members of the Ward Holdings Board bowed their heads politely, laid their proper words in their proper places. Newspapers wrote of tragedy and fragility in the life of a powerful man, but none of it redrew the map of the emptiness inside him. Ethan continued as he had once learned to, by feeling his way forward. The difference now was that he could see, and sight did not make grief smaller. It only sharpened its edges. The deal was postponed. Competitors and commentators filled the air with noise. Then, one day in Claire's notebook, tucked between 2 blank pages, he found a small post-it, an old receipt from a florist at Corsalea. The date was 2 days before the accident. On its back, written in soft graphite, one word: mimosa. He turned the word over in his mind like a key. Mimosa. The dry branch in the Braille book, the scent of the hospital, the rhythm of 3 gentle taps. Every clue had been working toward the same door, and when it finally opened, it made no sound. Walking along the Promenade des Anglais, Ethan felt the city resume its rhythm. Children skated, paper kites dipped toward the sea and rose again. He followed the curve of the path toward the beach. The pebbles under his shoes played a short, quick song. At the edge of the waves, he searched for the point where the horizon signed its quiet treaty with the city. In his hand, the post-it trembled against the salt wind, thin but stubbornly alive. He slipped it into his pocket and let his hands fall closer to the tide, as if the water might offer something more than cleansing. Sometime later, he decided to return to the office. Not as defeat, but as acceptance, to continue her order in the spaces her absence had left. On his desk, he placed his coffee cup. He paused before it touched the saucer. Then, with a faint, deliberate rhythm, 3 gentle knocks. It was both a tribute and a promise. Ward holdings would be discussed again. Numbers and negotiations would resume. But beneath the columns and contracts, there would remain an invisible architecture. A design patiently built years ago by a nameless girl in silence. Ethan was its sole heir, its only witness. Days learned to reshape themselves around loss. In the mornings, he climbed the steps of Colline du Château once more, feeling the light wind that brushed through the city. Within it, he could almost sense the lavender in her hair, the trace of citrus on her fingers, the small quiet that settled after the third tap of porcelain. The sea changed color with the hour. In each shade, he saw the same memory expanding, thinning, then dissolving into light. Sometimes a piano's melody drifted from an open window. The spaces between the notes taught him more than the words ever had. When the melody ended, the city's ordinary noise returned. But Ethan learned to weave the faint echo of that song into the rhythm of his own steps. To live at the edge of tragedy is to learn to read the world slowly. In his office, among meeting notes, Ethan kept one page from Claire's notebook. It carried no numbers, no plans, only the small crown drawn in the corner. To him, it was not a symbol of rule or triumph, but of protection. A tiny umbrella shading something fragile. That mark reminded him that the truest form of strength was the quiet act of sheltering what deserved to be kept safe. By evening, Nice was the same again. Polite, salty, full of light. Ethan resumed his walks. Eventually, he could pass the corner where the accident had happened. On the stones, he noticed a faint line drawn by old rain, disappearing in sunlight, reappearing at dusk. The city had a habit of keeping people's stories, then returning them gently, marked but intact. One evening, as the sun leaned toward the sea, its color somewhere between copper and rose, Ethan stopped at the railing of the promenade. He listened. The thin scrape of roller wheels on stone, a child's laughter carried on air, the handshake of waves and sand. He slipped his hand into his pocket, touching the post-it. The paper made no sound, but its silence was enough. Ethan closed his eyes. If one day he were to lose his sight again, and life had taught him that such turns were always possible, he knew he would still carry Nice within him. Its sounds, its scents, its patient order. Their love's gentle rhythm had been broken by a single night of rain. Yet the calm it had taught him remained, keeping his days balanced even at the edge of grief. Sometimes, a person survives by continuing the habits of the one they've lost, setting the cup down with 3 small taps, opening the window just enough for air but not lavender, closing the notebook without adding another mark. Ethan did all of these things. When night returned, the city smelled of salt again. The sky draped a thin veil over its lights. From somewhere far away, a piano played a short, familiar melody. As Ethan waited for the final note, he thought of the truest gift the city had given him, the quiet right to carry loss close to his body. The last note lingered, invisible in the air, then dissolved. Ethan leaned slightly against the railing. The surface of the sea turned for a heartbeat into a perfect mirror. In it, there were no longer 2 people. But within one, the order of 2 still lived. And even within tragedy, that was the quietest, strongest proof that life could still go on.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next story.